Our perfect marriage was a lie, and it all unraveled over a misdelivered package. I remember standing at the front door with my travel bag half-packed, the zipper jamming every time I tried to close it. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly tore it off. This wasn't how I ever pictured my life. Spending a late autumn evening on the verge of leaving the home my husband and I had built together. But I couldn't stay. Not after everything I'd discovered. Sometimes, when I think back to the night our doorbell rang and the courier handed me that small rectangular package, I wish I'd never answered. I wish I'd pretended not to be home, left the lights off, and spared myself the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. My name is Rachel, and for a long time, I believed I was living the kind of existence that deserved its own picture-perfect Instagram feed. James and I met in college. He was the quiet kid in my political science class who took copious notes and answered the professor with calm self-assurance whenever he was called upon. I was the one who sat at the back of the room, doodling in my notebook, too shy to speak unless it was absolutely required. One day, I forgot my textbook and sheepishly asked if I could peek at his. He slid it over without a second's hesitation, smiling so warmly that all my nerves seemed to dissolve. That night, we ended up grabbing a late dinner together and talking until the diner's neon lights flickered to signal closing time. It was the kind of conversation where you feel like you've known the other person your whole life. I always thought we'd be that couple who overcame everything, every obstacle, every challenge, simply by virtue of how well we understood each other. Our friends used to tease that we were nauseatingly perfect. We didn't fight. We didn't hurl insults at one another. Even when we disagreed, our arguments ended with quiet understanding and gentle apologies. In the early days, I thought maybe we were too good to be true, but James assured me that people can be lucky in love and that this wasn't a facade. When I told him my biggest fears, that he'd someday decide I wasn't worth the effort, he'd hold me close and whisper that I was everything he'd ever dreamed of. "Why would I leave my dream come true?" he'd say, making me laugh as he kissed my forehead. And I believed him. After college, we rented a tiny studio apartment in the city. We barely had enough room for a couch and a bed, but we made it work. We spent our weekends exploring parks, going to cheap matinee movies, and cooking elaborate meals in our one-burner kitchen. That same year, James got hired at a small marketing. He thrived there. I'd never seen him so confident. Meanwhile, I worked at a nonprofit, doing administrative tasks while dreaming of the day I could make a difference in the world. We struggled to pay off our student loans, but it felt like an adventure. We were a team, unstoppable and certain of our shared future. Eventually, we saved up enough to move to a nicer apartment with a spare bedroom. We painted the walls a soft shade of blue because James said it reminded him of the way the sky looked on the day we got married. That wedding was both simple and perfect. A few close friends, a small ceremony in a pretty garden, and so many heartfelt vows that left barely a dry eye in attendance. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the life I've always wanted. As we danced under twinkling lights, I cherished those memories, kept them safe in my mind as if they were treasures in a locked box. The few times we butted heads, over finances or miscommunications at work, ended quickly, with calm discussions and reaffirmations of our commitment. Over time, I fell into a comfortable certainty that we didn't keep secrets. We were the couple who told each other everything. Then, one late afternoon in early October, I heard the doorbell ring while I was cleaning up from a quiet day working at home. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, and James was staying late at the office to prepare for a big presentation. Opening the door, I found a tired-looking courier with a brown package in his hands. He asked me to sign, even though the name on the parcel, Trevor Martin, wasn't remotely close to either Rachel or James. Our last name, Hammond, didn't appear anywhere on the label. The courier shrugged, said it might be a mistake in the system, apologized for the inconvenience, and hurried off. I assumed it was some random error, a glitch in the addresses. I left the box unopened on the kitchen counter with a sticky note that read, "Wrong address, return to sender." I got busy with dinner and tried not to give it a second thought. But an hour later, I caught myself repeatedly glancing at it, as though the cardboard had started whispering my name. Something about its presence made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why. When James came home, he seemed distracted, hardly noticing me or the dinner I'd. He just said he had a splitting headache, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and retreated to our bedroom, claiming he needed to lie down. That was uncharacteristic of him, but I attributed it to work stress. I wanted to tell him about the oddly labeled delivery, but he was already half asleep by the time I mustered the energy to follow him in. The next morning, James left early, skipping breakfast, another unusual thing for him. I found the unopened box right where I'd left it. I called the courier service, hoping to arrange a pickup. They told me they had no record of any missing package for our address. "Just hold on to it," the representative suggested, "and hopefully the rightful owner will contact us." That only raised more questions for me. How could no one have any record? Still, I shrugged it off. I had real concerns like my job and the never-ending data entry I had to do that day. But by lunchtime, I caught myself staring at the box again. It had started to feel ominous. The name Trevor Martin was printed in plain black letters, and the address beneath it was indeed ours. Under normal circumstances, I would have assumed the real Trevor Martin was a neighbor in our building. But we didn't have a Trevor Martin. I knew all the names on the mailboxes in the lobby, and no one by that name lived here. Anxious curiosity gnawed at me. The tape sealing the package was already peeling at one corner, inviting me to take a peek. With a trembling hand, I peeled the tape back the rest of the way. Inside, I found an unassuming manila envelope. My brain screamed at me to stop. This was none of my business, right? But something about the entire situation pushed me forward, like I was compelled to open it. When I pulled out the contents, I saw bank statements, receipts, and a few typed documents. The bank statements were addressed to James Hammond, but the account holder's name read Trevor Martin. Confusion slammed into me. Why would my husband's name appear on statements for someone else? The transactions were large, thousands of dollars being deposited and withdrawn, but the statements didn't come from a local bank. It was some regional credit union in a different state. I scanned each page as my heart pounded, searching for a mistake. Maybe it was purely coincidental. But the date of birth on the statement matched James's birthday. The social security number, partially hidden, had the same last 4 digits as his. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. At the bottom of the stack, there was a photograph that made me gasp out loud. It was James, but not the James I knew. He was standing next to a woman I'd never seen, his arm around her waist. A huge grin lit up his face, the same grin he'd always given me. But here he was pressed intimately against a stranger. I flipped the photo over, as if the backside might contain an explanation, a date, something. It was blank, except for a small scrawled signature. TM. My entire body felt shaky. After a moment that felt like an eternity, I stuffed everything back into the envelope. My mind spun with questions. Was James living some kind of double life? Who was the woman? Why was he using a different name, Trevor Martin, for a separate bank account? There could be a perfectly innocent explanation, I tried to reason. Maybe it was an old photograph from before we met. Maybe he was helping a friend. My thoughts raced, but no matter how I twisted them, they all pointed to the same horrifying realization. My husband was lying to me about something big. For the rest of that day, I wandered around the apartment in a daze. I wanted to confront him immediately, but part of me needed answers. Real, solid answers, before saying anything. Fear gripped my chest every time I pictured his face. If I confronted him and he denied everything, would I have the courage to stand up for myself? I decided, in a strange haze of determination, that I had to find more proof. That evening, James got home early, which was surprising given how late he'd been working recently. He seemed tense, as though anticipating an argument, but I pretended everything was normal. It felt like lying to him was the only way to protect myself. We had a quiet dinner. I forced small talk about a friend's upcoming wedding, and he nodded but stayed distant. When he excused himself to watch a sports channel in the living room, I took my chance to head into his home office. I knew he kept personal documents locked in a metal filing cabinet. We both used that office, but he had his own drawer with a small keypad lock on it. I knelt by the filing cabinet, entering birthdays and other significant numbers, hoping to guess the code. My heart hammered so loudly I swore he could hear it from the next room. On my 5th try, I hit the jackpot. The drawer slid open. Inside were various folders labeled with mundane things, tax returns, employment contracts, but one folder near the back was unlabeled. I grabbed it, adrenaline surging through my veins. In it, I found more of those strange bank statements from the out-of-state credit union. They went back years, listing deposits I couldn't trace and cash withdrawals at addresses I'd never heard of. There was a copy of what looked like a fake ID with James's photo on it, but the name Trevor Martin. And then, pressed between the pages, I found a legal document referencing a property, some small house in Oregon, purchased under the name Trevor Martin. The deed listed James's date of birth once again. Confusion and betrayal roiled in my stomach. Why would my husband buy a property in Oregon and hide it under a false name? I shoved everything back in place as carefully as I could, heart pounding, and returned to the kitchen just in time to see James wandering in, saying he was looking for me. I stammered an excuse, pretending I'd been organizing the pantry. He didn't seem convinced. He stepped closer, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. "Everything okay? You seem a little off," he asked, voice wavering slightly. I forced a smile and nodded, pulling away. There was a flicker of worry in his eyes, but he let it go. That moment, as trivial as it might sound, felt like a turning point. I knew from the tension in his posture that something was eating him up inside, too. But neither of us spoke honestly. The lies between us were thick enough to choke on. Over the next few days, I struggled to act normal while quietly digging for more. I searched online records for the property in Oregon. It existed, all right. A small cabin near a lake, purchased 5 years ago by Trevor Martin. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out how James was paying. We weren't exactly rolling in extra cash. Yet these bank statements showed deposits that dwarfed our legitimate paychecks. It felt like I was trapped in a twisted detective story. Only the suspect was my own husband. One evening, I mustered the courage to call the credit union's customer service line. I pretended to be a prospective client, casually asking about their locations and services. When I slyly asked if they had a branch near a certain small Oregon town, the representative confirmed they did. My throat tightened at the confirmation. James had obviously been there. This explained his sudden business trips that sprang up out of nowhere over the past few years. He'd claimed to be traveling for marketing conferences, but apparently he had an entirely different agenda. The more I discovered, the more frightened I became. Was it possible that James was involved in something criminal? Or did he have another family stashed away in that Oregon house? My imagination ran wild with horrifying scenarios. I lost weight from the stress, often forgetting to eat. Nights became battles against insomnia, lying awake next to him, counting his breaths, wondering if he could sense my internal turmoil. Every day I planned a direct confrontation, then lost my nerve. Eventually, I confided in my closest friend, Samantha. She was the one person I trusted enough to share these bizarre revelations with. We met for coffee at a crowded cafe, and I told her everything, from the package to the discovered documents. She stared at me wide-eyed. "Rach, this sounds insane," she whispered, glancing around as though someone might be eavesdropping. "Are you sure this isn't some huge misunderstanding?" But as I pulled out my phone to show her the images I'd taken of the statements, her face went pale. "You have to talk to him," she said. "You can't just keep pretending everything's fine." Samantha was right. I owed it to myself to confront him, to hear whatever explanation he could possibly give. Part of me clung to the hope that there was a reason, some wild, improbable reason that would make sense of it all. Maybe he was secretly funneling money to help a relative. Maybe he was in trouble and didn't want to worry me. As the hours dragged on, I felt torn between dread and longing for clarity. One Friday night, James came home with a bouquet of flowers, which he rarely did unless it was a special occasion. He said, with an odd quiver in his voice, that he wanted to make dinner together. Just the two of us. Like old times. We worked side by side in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry while he told me about his day. He seemed to force a jovial tone, overcompensating. In a lull between sentences, I blurted out, "Who's Trevor Martin?" My words cut through the comfortable hum of the stove. He froze, the knife still in his hand. "What?" he asked quietly, not turning to face me. I inhaled sharply, feeling my pulse in my ears. "Trevor Martin," I repeated. "That's the name on a package that was delivered here by mistake. And on some documents I found." My throat tightened. "You know anything about that?" James slowly set down the knife, took a breath, and turned to me with a strange, guarded look in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he mumbled, but it sounded rehearsed, too smooth. "I've never heard of Trevor Martin." I pushed on. "That's not true, James. I know about the bank account. I know about the property in Oregon. I know about the photograph." My voice cracked on the last word. "Please, just tell me the truth." He stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders sagging. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out," he said quietly. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked, tears threatening to spill down my cheeks. He sank onto a kitchen stool, burying his face in his hands. "From my past. From mistakes I made before I met you. If you knew who I used to be, what I had to do, you'd never look at me the same way." I stood there, waiting for him to continue, but he just stared at the floor. Anger and confusion collided in my mind. "Try me," I said, arms crossed, determined not to let him off so easily. He swallowed. "I was involved in something illegal a long time ago. I had debts. Not just money, but obligations to people who did me favors. When I met you, Rachel, I promised myself I would get away from that life. So I changed my name, legally actually, before I moved here for college. But some ties are hard to break. Those accounts, that house, they're leftovers from a time I've spent years trying to forget." My heart hammered. "So you're telling me James Hammond isn't even your real name? It's just another identity you took on?" He shook his head. "It's legal now. But Trevor Martin was the name I was born with. I changed it before college and never looked back. I had no idea that package was coming. I don't know why it ended up here, but clearly someone wanted me to see it, or you to see it. Maybe a way to remind me I can't escape the past." Everything about the conversation felt surreal. "And the woman in the photo? Who is she?" He exhaled slowly. "Her name is Alexa. She was someone I knew back when everything was a mess. We were never married, But we have a child together. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could barely breathe. I was young, stupid. I thought I could handle it all, but after everything fell apart, I made a choice to start over. I send her money, so our kid is taken care of. That's why I have the account. But I swear I haven't seen her in person since before we even met. My knees felt weak and I gripped the counter for support. We had been married for years, talked about having children of our own eventually, and he'd never once hinted at being a father already. My mind replayed every conversation we'd ever had about our future family, how he said he couldn't wait to be a dad, how he seemed so genuine, so excited when we talked about saving up for a bigger place someday. I could barely hold myself together. "Why didn't you tell me this from the start?" I demanded, tears spilling over. "I trusted you." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Because I was terrified," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I didn't want to lose you." By the time I realized how serious we were, I'd already lied so much. I kept pushing it off, convinced I could handle it on my own, that you didn't need to know about my mistakes. We stood there in silence, all the illusions of our perfect marriage shattered around us. Every day that we'd spent in comfortable harmony now felt like a betrayal. How could I reconcile the James I knew, the sweet, thoughtful man who always planned anniversary surprises, with Trevor Martin, a man with a secret past, an unknown child, and possible criminal ties? My mind spiraled. I recalled all the times I'd admired his unwavering calm. Now it felt more like a mask. That night, I barely slept. James dozed fitfully on the couch, occasionally trying to come into the bedroom to talk, but I locked the door. I needed to process what I'd learned. I tried to envision what our life would look like if we stayed together. Would I ever trust him again? Would I constantly wonder if more secrets were lurking, waiting to pounce? And what about his child, my stepchild in a sense, living somewhere in Oregon? My stomach twisted at the thought. In the morning, James was gone. He'd left a note on the kitchen table. "I'm so sorry. I need time to figure out how to fix this. I love you. Please don't give up on us yet." That note set off a new wave of anger. He was running away, again. But it also gave me space to think. Without him around, I could call Samantha, bawl my eyes out, and try to form a plan. I even considered hiring a private investigator to see if he was telling me the whole story. But when I asked around, the cost was more than I could afford, especially since our finances might be questionable. For all I knew, our shared bank accounts were a ticking time bomb. Over the next few days, James sent occasional text messages. "We need to talk soon. Are you okay? I'm at a motel." I answered them sparingly, still crushed by the magnitude of his deception. Samantha stayed over one night, letting me vent for hours. At one point, we considered that maybe James's old accomplices, if that's who they were, could be dangerous. "What if they're the ones who sent the package?" she suggested. "Maybe they want something from him, and they're using you as leverage." That idea chilled me to the bone. The sudden misdelivery now seemed less accidental, and more like an intentional act to blow open James's cover. I found myself double-checking the locks on the doors, paranoid that someone might show up with demands or threats. My mind flicked to the possibility that James, or Trevor, had run off to handle exactly that kind of threat. My days felt like an endless cycle of worry and fear, made worse by the quiet emptiness of the apartment. I avoided going into the office, telling my boss I was sick. In truth, I was terrified I might break down crying in the middle of a meeting. Finally, after nearly a week of silence, James came home. He knocked on the door softly as if afraid to scare me. When I opened it, I was stunned by how tired and worn he was. His eyes were bloodshot, he hadn't shaved, and he looked thinner. He stepped inside cautiously, as though expecting me to yell at him or slam the door in his face. But I just stared, too exhausted to muster immediate anger. "I went to see them," he said quietly. "Alexa and my child. I needed to make arrangements so this could all be above board from now on. They deserve better than my secrecy, and you deserve better than half-truths." I folded my arms. "That's a start, but it doesn't erase the years of lying." He nodded, glancing down. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I just want you to know I'm done running." I called the old contacts, people I owed. I told them I'm finished playing their games. I'm settling everything I can, legally. It won't be easy, but I can't keep living in the shadows. A mixture of relief and anger surged inside me. "So what now?" I asked, voice trembling. "You just expect me to pick up the pieces and move on?" James shook his head. I want to earn your trust back, if that's even possible. If you tell me to leave right now, I will. But I'm hoping," he trailed off, tears brimming in his eyes. I had never seen him cry. The sight almost broke my heart, but I stayed guarded. Over the next week, we had long, painful conversations. James told me about his early life, the arrests, the shady deals, the short stints of couch surfing with questionable friends. He'd grown up in a broken home, gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd, And by the time he turned 20, he had more regrets than most people do in a lifetime. When he met Alexa, they were both lost in that chaotic. Their relationship was brief but intense. When she got pregnant, everything became even more complicated. But she came from money, from a family that despised James and threatened to report him for some scheme he'd been involved in. Scared and overwhelmed, he split. Then he realized he didn't want to spend his life on the run, so he legally changed his name, enrolled in college in another state, and tried to start over. He began quietly sending financial support to Alexa when he landed a decent job, though he avoided direct contact for fear her family would track him down. According to him, Alexa never wanted a relationship with him after how he'd left, but she accepted the money for the child's sake. He insisted he'd always planned to tell me someday, but the lie became so large he didn't know how to come clean. It was an awful lot to process. Part of me felt empathy for the scared young man he once was. Another part of me was furious he'd chosen to lie rather than trust me enough to share the truth. I kept remembering the day we moved into our second apartment, painting the walls, making grand plans for the future. He'd looked so hopeful, so earnest. But that image of James now felt like an illusion. Samantha suggested couples therapy. James readily agreed, offering to pay for it out of his personal funds. I balked at the idea of spending any of the money in those secret accounts, but he confessed he'd already closed them and was in the process of consolidating everything into a transparent, trackable arrangement. No more secrets, he told me. I was wary but appreciated the effort. We started sessions with a therapist named Dr. Garfield, who specialized in relationship issues stemming from dishonesty. The first few sessions were brutal, with me venting my rage and James fighting tears as he tried to apologize again and again. I told him it wasn't enough to say sorry if he couldn't guarantee he wouldn't lie in the future. He promised, but the word promise had lost so much weight. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about the child, his daughter, apparently named Emma. He showed me a photo on his phone, a sweet girl around 9 years old with freckles and a bright smile. It sent my heart into a tailspin. I felt an odd mixture of jealousy, guilt, and sadness. Here was a child, James's daughter, who'd grown up without her father in the house while I'd been living in blissful ignorance. Despite everything, I found myself wanting to meet her someday. The thought was terrifying, but how could I possibly move forward in a marriage if I rejected a child who was part of him? One day, in therapy, we tackled the question of whether we could rebuild trust. Dr. Garfield asked James what steps he was willing to take to show accountability. He talked about allowing me full access to all his financial records, his emails, even his phone. He said he'd share any information I wanted about his past. I sat there, arms folded, tears in my eyes, wondering if it was worth it. Could I ever love him the same way? Or would I always see him as two people, James, my caring husband, and Trevor, the man with a dark past? When the session ended, we walked to the car. He hesitated before unlocking the doors. "Rachel," he said softly, "I know you may never look at me the same way again, but please know I never faked how I feel about you. I have loved you from the moment I handed you my textbook. That's the only thing I'm certain of." His voice broke, and tears filled his eyes. I reached out and squeezed his hand, unsure of my own feelings, but not wanting to add more cruelty to the pain that already consumed us both. During the next few weeks, we tried to settle into a strange new normal. James informed his job that he needed some personal time to handle family matters. He spent hours on calls with lawyers and financial advisors, severing ties to anything that was fraudulent or hidden. He updated documents, putting everything in his legal name as James Hammond, officially this time. I hovered at the edges, still wary, but part of me admired how earnestly he was working to rectify his lies. Every once in a while, we'd share a tender moment, a lingering hug, a shared memory that made us laugh, but the shadow of betrayal never fully lifted. Then one evening, the doorbell rang again. My heart lurched, remembering the first package that started it all. I opened the door to see a man I'd never met, tall and broad-shouldered, with a grim expression. He asked for James. I stepped aside, fear twisting my stomach. James came out of the study, and his face paled the moment he saw our visitor. The stranger introduced himself as Brad, a representative for someone James apparently knew in his old life. My husband's posture stiffened, and he told me to go to the bedroom. I refused, standing my ground. Brad, in a calm yet icy tone, told James that certain debts weren't so easily canceled and that he should consider carefully before burning bridges. Apparently, the moment James started making calls to sever ties, word spread among people who once profited from his involvement. They weren't keen on him walking away free and clear. I felt my insides go cold. Was James in danger? Was I? James told Brad, "I'm done. You can relay that to everyone else. I'll settle up what I legally owe, but I won't be bullied." The man gave a sardonic chuckle, shot me a glance, then calmly left, saying something vague about being in touch. We locked the door after. My hands were trembling so violently that James had to lead me to the couch. I questioned, for the millionth time, whether I could handle the fallout of his past. A few nights later, James got another phone call that ended with him cursing under his breath. More threats, more pressure. I was exhausted from constantly being on edge. We reported it to the police, who took our statement but offered little in the way of immediate protection. The officer suggested a restraining order if harassment continued, but I could see James was worried about escalation. He confided that he felt deeply guilty for dragging me into his mess, and in my heart, I knew things might get worse before they got better. Despite the fear, something shifted in me. Seeing him actively face the consequences, refusing to run, made me realize that this man was different from the young runaway who once abandoned everything. He was trying to protect me, but not through lies or cowardice. This time, he was standing firm in the truth. I recognized that if he kept his word, if he stayed honest, maybe there was a path forward. Maybe we could rebuild. We went back to therapy, discussing ways to set boundaries and handle the threats. Dr. Garfield suggested we look into relocating, maybe even out of state, to truly start fresh. That idea terrified. Our life was here. My job, our friends, everything. But then I thought, was it really our life, if half of it was built on deceit? A new location might be the best chance to break free from the ghosts of Trevor Martin. The conversation lingered in the background of our minds, unresolved. In the meantime, James invited me to meet Emma, his daughter, if I was ready. After so much turmoil, I hesitated. Was I emotionally prepared to face that reality? But the alternative, staying in denial, felt worse. So one weekend, we flew to Oregon. The day we arrived, I was nauseous with nerves. We drove to a modest suburban neighborhood, and James parked outside a white two-story house. My heart hammered like it was about to burst. Alexa answered the door, an expression of wary disbelief when she saw me. She had large, tired eyes and an athletic build. She'd probably been beautiful once, but stress and life had worn her down. She simply said, "You must be Rachel," before letting us inside. Emma stood in the living room, her eyes flicking from James to me. She had his cheekbones, his shy smile. I tried not to cry as James knelt down to greet her. He looked terrified, like a man on the brink of losing what he wanted most in the world. Emma clutched a stuffed cat in her arms. Alexa explained softly that Emma knew James was her father, but he'd been away. James gently reached for her hand, and she allowed it. They spoke halting, like two strangers meeting for the first time, because in many ways they were. I watched from a small distance, feeling like an intruder in a place I never expected to be. My heart ached for Emma, robbed of a proper father-daughter bond by secrets and fear. Alexa and I exchanged polite words in the kitchen. She seemed guarded, protective of her daughter. I understood why. This was the man who had abandoned them once. She didn't trust his sudden reappearance. It was only because James had been sending monthly payments that she hadn't cut him off entirely. Now, seeing the remorse etched on his face, I believed he truly wanted to be part of Emma's life. But it wasn't up to me to grant him that. Ultimately, that decision lay with Alexa and Emma. That visit was painfully short, yet it felt like a lifetime. When we left, Emma waved timidly, still hugging her stuffed cat. James promised to come back soon, to call regularly. Whether Alexa believed him or not was unclear, but there was a seed of possibility that maybe, over time, the wounds could begin to heal. Sitting in the car afterward, James sobbed into his hands, repeating, "I'm sorry," over and over. I held his shoulder, unsure how to comfort him, but feeling closer to him in that raw moment than I had in weeks.